Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Kodanitai Maya Pushashi Jaya Kodanitai Jaya Maya Pushashi Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Prabhupada Nitai Gaura Haribo 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 Gaura Haribo Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivraja Acharya Asta Parashakti Shri Srimad Divine Grace of Bhai Charan Arvinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Shri Shri Kodanitai Mayapur Shashi Ki Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Nitai Okay. This isn't working. So we're reading from Srila Prabhupada Leelamrita, volume number 6, Uniting Two Worlds. This is the beginning of a new chapter at home in India. There were, of course, other reasons for Prabhupada's returning to India. Oh, I need this microphone. There were, of course, other reasons for Prabhupada's returning to India besides meeting Indira Gandhi. His regular rhythm had become to alternate touring the West with staying in India. He was leading his movement by traveling from center to center, but for at least 5 years now, he had devoted more of his time to India. His ambitious projects in Mayapur and Vrindavan, although increasing the prestige of the Krishna consciousness movement, were by no means completed, and Hare Krishna land in Bombay was still only a construction site. Unlike in America and Europe, where Srila Prabhupada achieved his objectives by inspiring disciples to carry on the management, in India he was the manager. He had to be. Otherwise, his Western disciples would be cheated and become dispirited. Pressing managerial decisions, therefore, brought him frequently to India. Moreover, he had a special inclination to be in India. He had a deep spiritual attraction to the holy dhams. Vrindavan was his home and Mayapur was his place of worship. And he liked the unique opportunities for meeting and influencing people in places like Bombay. His upcoming meeting with India's chief executive was the kind of opportunity that came rarely in the West. And in addition to all these reasons, Prabhupada also felt most relaxed and at home there. When breaking some of his commitments to visit more cities in the US, he had written to a disciple, "I was not able to come to Atlanta because I was called here to India on urgent business. Also, I was feeling inconvenienced by so much traveling." Prabhupada often referred to New York, London, and Los Angeles as his special homes, and to America as his fatherland. And when a disciple once remarked that Prabhupada would feel more at home in India, he had replied, "My only home is the lotus feet of Krishna." Nevertheless, for whatever reason or combination of reasons, Srila Prabhupada was showing a definite preference for staying in India. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Ramachandra Kaviraj and the appearance day of Srila Gopala Bhatta Goswami.
Did you say appearance day of Sri Ramachandra Kaviraj? So it's both disappearance days. Gopal Bhatta's appearance day and Sri Ramachandra Kaviraj's disappearance day. Okay, so Sri Ramachandra Kaviraj, the son of Chiranjeeva Sen, appeared in Sri Kanda. Although married, he and his wife Ratanala had no material attachments. I've got a really big mouth, so I don't know if it's really worth faffing around with the microphone. I've got a gigantic mouth that's far too loud anyway. So. Although married, he and his wife Ratanala had no material attachments. They stayed fully engaged in the loving service of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. They had no children. With steadfast devotion, he served his spiritual master Srinivas Acharya. In Vrindavan, Sri Jiva Goswami gave him the title Kaviraj, King of Poets. Ramachandra Kaviraj was one of the 8 Kavirajas, famous poet disciples of Srinivas Acharya. Ramachandra wrote Smarana Darpana, Smarana Chamatkara, Siddhanta Chandrika. He preached widely and initiated many disciples. Narottam Das Thakur and Ramachandra lived together as best friends. Narottam Das wrote, Doya Koro Sri Acharya Prabhu Srinivas Ramachandra Sangamage Narottama Das. O Srinivas Acharya, please give me your mercy. Narottam Das always prays for the association of Ramachandra Kaviraj. In the form of Karna Manjari, he serves Srimati Radharani in Vrajalila. His samadhi is in Dhira Samira Kunj in Vrindavan, next to Srinivas Acharya's. Yeah, we used to sing that song every day. And the appearance day of Srila Gopal Bhatta Goswami. Sri Gopal Bhatta Goswami was the son of Venkata Bhatta, a resident of Sri Rangam. In the year 1433, Shakabda, when Lord Chaitanya was touring South India, he stayed for 4 months during the period of Chaturmasya at the house of Venkata Bhatta, who then got the opportunity to serve the Lord to his heart's content. Gopal Bhatta also got the opportunity to serve the Lord at this time. He was later initiated by his uncle, the great sannyasi Prabodhananda Saraswati. When Lord Chaitanya was informed that Gopal Bhatta went to Vrindavan, he was very pleased and advised Sri Rupa and Sanatan to accept Gopal Bhatta as their younger brother and to take care of him. Under the instruction of Srila Rupa and Sanatan, he installed one of the 7 principal deities of Vrindavan, the Radharaman deity. Srila Gopal Bhatta Goswami compiled a book called Satkriya Saradipika, edited the Hari Bhakti Vilas, wrote a foreword to the Satsandaba, and a commentary on the Krishna Karnamrita. Formerly, he was an Anga Manjari. Sometimes it is also said that he was an incarnation of Guna Manjari. Srinivas Acharya and Gopinath Pujari were his 2 disciples. That's why sometimes there's some confusion over who wrote the Hari Bhakti Vilas. It was written by Srila Sanatan Goswami, but then it was edited by Gopal Bhatta Goswami. It's kind of revised and edited, so sometimes it's credited to one, sometimes it's credited to the other. It's interesting, it says, under the instruction of Srila Rupa and Sanatan, he installed one of the 7 principal deities of Vrindavan. Gopal Bhatta Goswami made a pilgrimage to Kali Gandaki in Nepal. Was it Nepal at the time? Was it considered Nepal at that time, or was it part of India? Anyway, he went to the Kali Gandaki and he wanted to worship Shalagram Shilas. Gopal Bhatta Goswami is from South India, so actually Gopal Bhatta Goswami and Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, to the best of my knowledge, Shivaram Maharaj has mentioned this a few times, they were the main devotees who were actually giving Diksha, They were the ones who were initiating disciples. And then Jiva Goswami, Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, they were giving shiksha, because Gopal Bhatta Goswami and Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, they were from Brahman. They were from a Brahman community. They were like from a Brahman family in South India. So they were very expert in the Panchatrika Vidhi. They'd been brought up, trained in the system of deity worship and all the different aspects of Panchatrika Vidhi, which would include giving Brahminical initiation and giving Gayatri Mantra, because the Gayatri Mantras are required for worshipping the deities. So because he was from South India and he had this expertise in Panchatrika Vidhi, and he was like Brahminical by birth, then he had an inclination to worship Shalagram Shila, because it's very much part of the tradition of South India to worship Shalagram. So he made a pilgrimage to Kali Gandaki in Nepal, which is where the Shalagram Shilas are found. And the story goes that he, well, there's different versions of the story, but basically he went there with a lota and he put his lota into the water of the Gandaki, and then a number of shalagrams sort of entered into his lota. And he kind of, well, the story is told in different ways, but the most kind of dramatic version of the telling is that he actually went all the way back to Vrindavan, and then when he got there, he thought, actually, I'm not worthy to worship shalagrams. So he went all the way back to Nepal to put the shalagrams back into the Kali Gandaki. And then when he did that, they re-entered his lota again. And then he felt, well, the Lord's telling me that he wants me to worship him in this form. So then he went back, and every day he was worshiping. Do you know the exact number, Javit? Was it 7? Was it 12? 12. Yeah, so he had 12 Shalagram Shilas, and he was worshipping them every day. But in his heart, being a pure Vaishnava in the line of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, then in his heart he always had this desire to worship Tribhanga form of Krishna, threefold bending form of Krishna. Like, Rupa Goswami worships Radha Govinda, Sanatana Goswami worships Radha Madan Mohan, Jiva Goswami worships Radha Damodar. So it was the tradition of the Goswamis to worship this Tribhanga form of Krishna. And he had this desire in his heart, but he didn't act on it. He just let it be there within his heart, and he meditated upon his shalagrams as being forms of Krishna or features of Krishna. And then on Nrsimha Chaturdashi, a person arrived who had a gift of clothing, of cloth for deities. He had outfits for deities, and he had that as a gift for Gopal Bhatta Goswami. So he gave it to Gopal Bhatta, but Gopal Bhatta said, well, I have no deity in that form that can accept this outfit. But he left them besides his shalagrams as an offering for them. So this was on Nrsimha Chaturdashi. And then the next day, the morning after Nrsimha Chaturdashi, he woke up, took his bath, went to wake his deities. And anyone know which shalagram it was? Anyone know which Shila? It was the Damodar Shila. So the Damodar Shila of Gopal Bhatta Goswami had manifested into the form of Radha Raman. And it's a self-manifesting deity. So when you go into Vrindadevi's room, that picture right in front as you walk in, the picture that's on the wall there, it's actually a painting. It took me years to figure out that it's not a photograph. I was chanting, and then I was like, something different about this photo, and I realized it's a painting of Radha Raman. It's not a photograph of Radha Raman. Really good painting. So there's a painting of Radha Raman on the wall there. This is Gopal Bhatta's Goswami's deity, and he manifested from the Shalagram Shila, the Damodar Shila of Gopal Bhatta Goswami, and also we say Radha Raman, but there's no deity of Radharani. But in Vrindavan, when you go and see Radha Raman, then the Vesh, the outfit is there. There's Shringar and Vesh, the crown and dress and jewelry is there for Srimati Radharani, and it's kept beside Radha Raman. And the idea is that, well, not just the idea, the understanding is there that Srimati Radharani is always there with Krishna. So we may not see her with our eyes, but she's there, she's present there. And Radha Raman is one of the only deities of one of the original deities of the Goswamis, who is still there in his original form in Vrindavan. Because all the other deities, if you look at the other, especially the other temples of the Goswamis, they're a lot more grand. Radha Madan Mohan temple. I mean, the Madan Mohan temple is really, that is, it's just probably that and Kusum Sarovar are probably the most iconic images of Vrindavan. The Madan Mohan temple and Kusum Sarovar. If you Google Vrindavan, that's going to be one of the two things that's very close to the top of the images list. And so a lot of, the Radha Govindaji temple was so grand that it infuriated, was it Aurangzeb? And he came and he ordered his men to come and dismantle it. And even the Radha Damodar temple, although it's a little more discreet, still when you arrive there, you're at a temple. And all of the deities of these Goswamis, they were quite large, maybe around about 3 or 4 feet high, like around the size of Kodanitai Mayapushashi. So they were quite big deities in quite grand temples. So it was really hard to hide them. So when India was invaded at points in history by persons who were very inimical towards the traditions of deity worship, then those deities were taken. They were moved to Jaipur, and they're still there to this day. Radha Govinda is there, either Jaipur or Karoli. Radha Govinda, Radha Damodar, Radha Madan Mohan, all these different, the main principal deities of Vrindavan, they're there. But if you go to the Radha Raman temple in Vrindavan, first of all, the temple itself is quite discreet. It's kind of tucked away in a little back lane. Every time I go, I spend about 2 hours. Radha Raman this way, okay. Get to the end of that street. Radha Raman that way, okay. It's like every road. It's like, where do I go from here? And you end up in some little alley and some little back street, and then Radha Raman temple's there. And even when you go inside, it's a whole kind of maze and complex of different buildings and different things, and eventually you find the temple, and then Radha Raman's there, and he's about this big. He's absolutely beautiful. When you actually see him, you can get some photographs of him, and he's a small deity, but you can see his teeth, you can see his fingernails, all these incredible details are there. So this is the Lord personally manifesting his form. And the different the three principal deities of Vrindavan, sorry, I'm going a little off topic here, but the three principal deities of Vrindavan are Radha Madan Mohan, Radha Govinda, and Radha Gopinath. And the story goes, there's different people that are sort of described in the story, but one of the stories is, I think it's Rohini, the mother of Balaram, or anyway, I'm not sure. Anyway, there was one personality, and this personality was personally present during Krishna's pastimes, because these deities, although they were installed by the 6 Goswamis, they didn't manifest at the time of the Goswamis. They were actually originally installed by Vajranabh, Krishna's great-grandson, Juna's great-grandson, and Parikshit Maharaj's great-grandson, or grandson. Is it Krishna's? Vajranabh. Anyway, Vajranabh. So, yeah, Krishna's great-grandson. So he installed these deities in Vrindavan 5,000 years ago, just after Krishna disappeared, and then those deities kind of disappeared from vision, and then they were rediscovered by the Goswamis. So those deities are actually many, many thousands of years old. And the story goes that when it was time to carve these deities, then they consulted one person, and I forget exactly who it was. I've heard different stories. One story is that it was Kubja, one story is that it was Rohini. So there's different people who are mentioned, but basically they carved these different deities, and every time she saw them, she said, from the feet to the waist, this is exactly like Krishna. And then the next deity, it was from the waist to the neck. This is exactly the form of Krishna. And then the third one, which I think is Gopinath, forgive me if I'm wrong, he said, yes, this is the face of Krishna. And Radha Raman is said to be the from the feet to the waist of this deity, from the waist to the neck of this deity, and then the face of this deity. So Radha Raman is like the perfect form of Krishna. So he's a really, really, really wonderful deity to meditate upon and to look at. So he was the deity of Srila Gopal Bhatta Goswami. So sorry, that was a glorification of Gopal Bhatta Goswami, which got a little carried away. So Srila Gopal Bhatta Goswami ki jai, Srila Ramachandra Kaviraj ki jai, Srila Radhika Raman ki jai. Nitai Gaur Brahmanandi Hari Bol. So, short class. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, 5th canto, chapter 8, the character of Bharat Maharaj. And this is text number 14, right? Text number 14. Now, I had a look at this before, and I couldn't figure out the Sanskrit for the life of me. So I can try and read the Sanskrit, but we'll just go over it quickly.
It's supposed to be a prose, and you just read it. You have to repeat it.
Okay. Kriyayam nirvatyamanayam antarale pyutayotaya dainam abhichakshita tahivavasava shapati prakriti stena manasa tasma asisha asaste swastistad vatsate savata iti. So word for word. Kriyayam, the activities of worshipping the Lord or performing ritualistic ceremonies. Nirvatyamanayam, even without finishing. Antarale, at intervals in the middle. Api, although. Utaya, repeatedly getting up. Yada, when. Enam, the deer calf. Abhichakshita, would see. Tahivava, at that time. Sa, he. Varshapati, Maharaj Bharat. Prakriti stena, happy. Manasa, within his mind. Tasmai, unto it. Ashisha ashaste, bestows benedictions. Swasti, all auspiciousness. Stat, let there be. Vatsa, O my dear calf. Te, unto you. Savata, in all respects. Iti, thus. Translation. When Maharaj Bharat was actually worshipping the Lord or was engaged in some ritualistic ceremony, although his activities were unfinished, he would still, at intervals, get up and see where the deer was. In this way, he would look for it. And when he could see that the deer was comfortably situated, his mind and heart would be very satisfied. He would bestow his blessings upon the deer, saying, "My dear calf, may you be happy in all respects." Purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. Because his attraction for the deer was so intense, Bharat Maharaj could not concentrate upon worshipping the Lord or performing his ritualistic ceremonies. Even though he was engaged in worshipping the deity, his mind was restless due to inordinate affection. While trying to meditate, he would simply think of the deer, wondering where it had gone. In other words, if one's mind is distracted from worship, a mere show of worship will not be of any benefit. The fact that Bharat Maharaj had to get up at intervals to look for the deer was simply a sign that he had fallen down from the spiritual platform. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tatati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Sri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakam Vitamscha Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Pastichade Shatarane Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhu bhevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So when Maharaj Bharat was actually worshipping the Lord or was engaged in some ritualistic ceremony, although his activities were unfinished, he would still at intervals get up and see where the deer was. In this way, he would look for it. And when he could see that the deer was comfortably situated, his mind and heart would be very satisfied, and he would bestow his blessings upon the deer, saying, "My dear calf, may you be happy in all respects." Yeah, so this phenomenon of distraction is a big problem. It's a problem for everyone, but it's especially a problem for devotees. There's many years ago, we had this little book. It's actually a book by His Holiness Bir Krishna Goswami. Originally, it was entitled "You're Not That Body," but we printed it and we kind of republished it as Real Body Talk. Little book, really nice little book, like a very introductory book to the basics of Krishna consciousness. Every page was a different philosophical point. Who is Lord Chaitanya? You're not that body. The Bhagavad Gita. Just different aspects of Krishna consciousness. And there was a little line. There was like a line drawing on every page, like a little illustration, just to illustrate the point that was being made. And I always remember, probably more than any other picture, I remember one picture that was in the book. The point that was being spoken about was sense control. And the picture was that there was a man in some supermarket or some kind of shop, department store or something like that. And this man's kind of walking through the shop, and his senses are dragging him in all different directions. So he's got this tongue that's kind of coming out of his mouth and pulling him towards the food, and his eyes getting dragged towards some magazine with an attractive woman on the front, and his ears pulling him towards the music department, and his nose is pulling him towards all the nice cakes that are being baked nearby. So in this way, his senses are just dragging him through the shop. So Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita that the living entity is kind of trapped within this body of the six senses, which include the mind. So you have hearing, sight, smell, touch, and taste. So these are generally considered the five senses, but Krishna actually includes a sixth sense. It's like we have this saying, the sixth sense. But as far as Krishna is concerned, the sixth sense is the mind. So the mind is the center of all the senses. There's many different analogies which are used to sort of explain it. One of the ones that I quite like, I guess, because I used to like listening to music, is that like an old, although apparently vinyl's making a comeback now, but I was going to say an old style record player where you have the record, you have the needle, the stylus that kind of makes contact with the record, and then the stylus communicates information to the speakers. It kind of communicates to the speakers, and then whatever is contained on that vinyl, on that record, is ultimately sort of communicated through the speakers via the stylus. So in the same way, we're wandering around the material world, and the senses are coming in contact. The nose is coming in contact with something, the ears coming in contact with something, the eyes coming in contact with something, and all the information that the senses are coming in contact with, that information is being sent to the mind. And the function of the mind is basically accepting, rejecting, thinking, feeling, and willing. But particularly in this case, accepting and rejecting according to the modes of material nature, as they affect us as individuals, then our mind will either like or dislike the information that our senses communicate to the mind. So, it's like there's all these arguments that go on. How can you like that music? That music's rubbish. How can you not like this music? How can you think that movie was good? How can you like that book? You should like this book. But it's all just the modes of material nature. We're affected by them in a particular way. Our mind, our body, our subtle body, our whole physical being is basically just a combination of the three modes of material nature in different combinations. So some of us may be more, have a slightly different balance of the mode of goodness, the mode of passion. Someone may be more in the mode of ignorance. And according to those modes of material nature, then that information is communicated to the senses, and our mind says, like, don't like, want it, don't want it. And then at that point, the intelligence is supposed to kick in, because the function of the intelligence is discrimination. The function of the intelligence is that, okay, you like it, you want it, but it's not good for you, but you don't have enough money for it, but it's gonna be a problem for your Krishna consciousness if you. So in this way, the living entity is constantly being distracted by the sense objects, and then the mind is sort of picking up that information, and then what we need to do is strengthen our intelligence, so that no matter what information we receive from the senses, the sense objects in the mind, then ultimately we want to try and develop our intelligence based upon the Bhagavad Gita, the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Chaitanya Charitamrita, the instructions of our gurus. So this should actually become our intelligence. Our intelligence is developed and molded according to the knowledge and the instructions that we receive, so that when we receive information from the senses and from the mind, then we know what to do with that information. We know whether to say yes, no, do it, don't do it, want it, don't want it. We know how to sort of act upon that. Now, this kind of dynamic of becoming distracted by the sense objects is really something which is heavily, heavily manipulated by incredibly materially intelligent and manipulative people in the world. Advertising and so many other things are basically just manipulating our senses and manipulating our mind and convincing us that we want or we don't want something. That's basically what advertising is. Advertising is done in such a way that the combination of colors, the particular type of font, the images used, the exact combination of words, the size of the words, everything is so subtly and precisely designed in such a way to basically convince us that here is a sense object, and yes, you do want it. That's the way that advertising works. And not only advertising, there's actually there was a really interesting and actually quite useful documentary which was released a few months ago. It made quite a stir around the world. It was called The Social Dilemma. I don't know if anyone's seen that, but it's all about the way that sort of social networking and social media sort of manipulates the mind and manipulates the intelligence to basically get drawn into it and get sort of manipulated by it. And it's quite interesting when you watch the documentary. So as part of the documentary, there's like a sort of drama that's been created and is sort of running through it. So it's kind of keeps jumping backwards and forwards between hearing from people who are actually either employees of or former employees of very, very big tech companies. And then every now and again, it will go back to this kind of little story which is being played out. And part of the story is that there's like a family, and the mother of the family is trying to convince the children to stop spending so much time on their phones and tablets and start having more sort of personal interaction as a family. And at one point she takes all the phones away and puts it into like a locked glass safe that has a timer on it. So basically, once dinner's over, the timer will be released and you can have your phones back. And while the family's talking, the youngest girl, you kind of don't really notice it happening, but she kind of walks off, finds a hammer in the middle of dinner, just starts smashing the safe up because she's so kind of like, she can't exist without the phone. And it's a drama, and it's over the top, and it's hopefully that's not the way that these things affect us, but the point is that the way that the world and whether it's a Kali Yuga thing or whether it's just nature of the material world, but I can't imagine in Dwapara Yuga or Satya Yuga or Treta Yuga there being quite so many billboards knocking around and quite so many mobile phones. So it's definitely a sort of phenomenon of modern civilization that this principle of becoming distracted is very much a tool which we can all fall victim to, especially, the responsibility of the followers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Srila Prabhupada is not to, obviously circumstances allowing, we're not supposed to just stay in one place, but we're supposed to go out into the world. We're supposed to share Krishna consciousness with others. We're supposed to sort of go out, and that means that we need to sort of expose ourselves to these things which are there, which can actually be quite dangerous to devotees, to those who are trying to give up the material world, trying to give up those sense objects. Then when we're confronted day after day after day with very, very, very incredibly powerful and manipulative tools, and not just when we go out, but like using this one example, we all have our phones, we're all online, we're all using the internet. And so the danger of becoming distracted and the danger of becoming sort of misled away from our devotional service, like in the case of Bharat Maharaj, he was distracted by a sense object. And that distraction, Prabhupada even says in the purport that, even when he was in the middle of doing service, he would suddenly, it's like, you can imagine someone's on the altar. And I've kind of fallen victim to this, although not as a general rule, but I've kind of experienced it, that, you're on the altar and somehow you just feel pulled towards looking at something on your phone or something like that. And it's a very, very powerful and very, very dangerous thing. This is not the principle of deity worship. It's not the principle of bhakti. It's not the principle. It's like chanting our japa. If we have our bead bag in one hand and our phone in the other, then we have a problem. It means we're not actually chanting japa. And Srila Prabhupada makes a very strong point here in the purport. He says that, in other words, if one's mind is distracted from worship, a mere show of worship will not be of any benefit. Now, that's a very strong statement, and we can, that's something which we could analyze and we could really consider what that really means. But if nothing else, we can definitely take it as a warning, that if we're in the habit of doing our devotional activities, of chanting our japa, which is our most important activity, but while chanting our japa, we're looking at our phone or making notes or answering texts, these kind of things, then, are we actually getting the benefit of our japa? Are we actually chanting japa? Or are we meditating on Krishna's holy names? If we're worshiping the deity, but we're taking a break to go and see, whether someone's replied to our text, are we actually worshiping the deity? And even, we're reading the Srimad Bhagavatam, but we keep our phone nearby. It's like, there is a time for these things, and there is also a time for worshiping Krishna. And when, worshipping Krishna means that's what we're doing. In fact, if I remember rightly, I've not studied it to the extent that most of you have, because I'm usually there. I'm usually just there when it's going on. But if I remember rightly, what is it? When I chant, I chant. That's one of Mahatma Prabhu's japa affirmations. When I chant, I chant. So the same goes for all activities in bhakti. When I chant, I chant. When I read, I read. When I worship the deity, I worship the deity. When it's time for management, it's time for management. When it's time for cooking, I cook. You know, it's like whatever we're doing in devotional service, that's what we're doing. You know, and it becomes a meditation. It's actually supposed to be a meditation. I was listening, I started listening to it yesterday, and then I was continuing this morning, and hopefully I'll complete it at some point today. But His Grace Kurma Prabhu, who is very famous devotee in ISKCON, famous as a chef, he's just done an interview online, which was absolutely fantastic. It's really incredible. He's talking all about his life, how he became a devotee, his different experiences in Krishna consciousness through his life. But I was listening to it, and it's something which I've kind of considered quite a lot, is just using this one example of cooking for Krishna. I mean, wow, you know, who cooks for Krishna? Radharani cooks for Krishna. Mother Yashoda cooks for Krishna. And somehow we're allowed to cook for Krishna. That's bhajan. You know, that's not just a duty. That's bhajan. That's like a very, very incredibly deep service to do, a very, very deep meditation, cooking for Krishna, dressing Krishna. You know, who does that? We're probably not going to be able to do that when we get back to the spiritual world, but here we can do it practically every day, you know. So these are very, very, very deep meditative activities. And to actually get the benefit of these activities, to really actually experience these services, and not just as any service, you know, chanting Krishna's names, reading the Srimad Bhagavatam, you know, organizing the Sankirtan movement, going out on Sankirtan. That's Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Nityananda's. You know, you look at the devotees, that's Ramachandra Kaviraj and Gopal Bhatta Goswami. They're the devotees who are helping to organize the Sankirtan. But we're given these services. They're actually incredibly, incredibly deep meditations. They're not just something that we do as a mechanical way, but if, you know, hopefully one day to really experience these activities means to really be very, very deeply absorbed in the very deep mood and meaning of what it is that we're actually doing at that point in time. And then this is Krishna consciousness. So one of I would say the most important, but I would go so far as to say that the two most important things that we can do to really sort of help build that mood and develop that consciousness is very, very serious japa and very, very serious hearing about Krishna. Because this is what will form our meditation. When we're doing our service, when we're doing the management, when we're doing the Sankirtan, when we're dressing the deities, when we're cooking for Krishna, the thing that's really going to make that a very, very deep, intense, and incredible bhajan and meditation is that the foundation of that is very intense concentration upon hearing Krishna's names and hearing about Krishna. You know, which is why hearing, reading, studying, and very, very serious japa are absolutely crucial, so that by doing that, we're actually really able to experience what it means to dress Krishna, what it means to cook for Krishna, what it means to distribute books for Srila Prabhupada and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. You know, what it means to grow vegetables for Krishna or chop vegetables for Krishna is the same thing. It's like I'm chopping vegetables. These are the activities of the spiritual world. These are the activities of Goloka Vrindavan. You know, the most elevated and exalted personalities in all of creation in the spiritual world, they're cutting Krishna's vegetables. They're cooking Krishna's meals. They're dressing Krishna. They're cleaning Krishna's house. You know, that this is what the most exalted personalities in all of existence are doing. And all we can hope for is that, you know, if and when we're finally allowed entrance into that region, we can just do some tiny little service to help them, you know, pass them the brush, great. I can be connected. But here we've got the chance to clean all of Krishna's house, cook all of Krishna's meals, dress Krishna and Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda completely from top to bottom. These are very, very exalted activities, but the only way that we can really, really experience them is if the foundation of those activities is very, very, very serious sadhana, really serious hearing and chanting, free from distraction. It's very important, and it's going to take practice, because the nature of the mind is to be distracted. The nature of the mind is to be distracted. Krishna even says that in the Bhagavad Gita, from wherever the mind wanders, due to its flickering and unsteady nature, one must certainly withdraw it and bring it back under the control of the self. So in one sense, we shouldn't become discouraged that the mind does get distracted, but we should make it our goal to train ourselves to not be distracted. And a lot of that requires a sort of mechanical discipline, which is where things like japa affirmations come in. When I chant, this is not the time for cell phones. It's not the time for management. It's not the time for phone calls. It's not the time for any of these things. It's the time for japa. When I'm reading the Srimad Bhagavatam, that's what I'm doing. When we're hearing the Bhagavatam, that's what we're doing. And even if that's just a few moments a day, but just very, very serious and intense effort to hear. We may not be able to hear. Sometimes we can make the biggest effort in the world, but we're not going to hear our japa, because somehow or other there's something that we may need to go through. But the effort to try and hear, the effort to really try to fix our mind, by doing that day after day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, gradually the mind does settle down. The mind does become controlled. Anyone that's known, it's like Javat Prabhu and Mother Vrinda, they'll remember when I had, the first 4 or 5 years, or probably the first 10 years that I was here, it was like I was screaming my japa. The mind is so loud. I was just driving all the devotees up the wall, because it was like the mind is just so loud, so powerful. I was storming up and down the temple room. I remember one time I asked Kadruma Bihari Prabhu, we were in the Sankirtan car, and somehow the subject of spontaneous human combustion came up, and I said, wow, it's really weird. I can't even imagine how something like that could happen. And Kadruma says, I don't know, I've watched you chanting japa every morning for the last 5 years. I could well imagine how it's possible. So the mind can be very, very loud, very powerful, and it can be very hard to hear the name. But at least mechanically we have this discipline that I'm going to try and hear, and whenever I remember to, whenever I become conscious, I'm going to try and bring the mind back, try and create this discipline of becoming free from distraction. And then after some time, after either weeks, months, years, decades, depending on how deep our conditioning is, the mind will start to calm down, and we will start to be able to meditate more deeply on the sound of Krishna's name. We will be able to meditate. I was speaking with, I think it was probably Garanganam Prabhu or Chaitanya Vallabha, probably Garanganam. We were speaking about reading Srila Prabhupada's books. And this subject came up that Prabhupada's books are simple. Prabhupada says Krishna consciousness is simple for the simple. And we were both saying that we'd sort of had this experience that after so many years of reading Prabhupada's books, the surprising thing is that as you go on, they don't become more and more sort of complex. They actually become more and more simple. You actually start realizing how actually simple the statements are that Prabhupada's making in his books. But because the mind's so distracted, we quite often miss the simplicity of what's actually there in Prabhupada's purports. They're not actually very complicated. They're very simple and easy to follow. Of course, the purports themselves are incredibly deep. What's within those simple statements is incredibly deep, but it's not so hard to read once the mind does calm down and become a little free from distraction, but complicated for the complicated. When the mind is complicated and distracted, then everything becomes a problem. But we keep going, we keep trying, we keep practicing, and then and then we get more taste for hearing and chanting. And with that taste for hearing and chanting, the activities that we're performing, our activities, our duties, our services, they become much, much deeper and much more relevant as time goes on. So if we, if we really want to experience, the things that we read about in books like The Nectar of Devotion, then the foundation of that is really, really good hearing and really good chanting and very deep absorption in Krishna consciousness. So it's just after 30:30. If there's time for any questions, if anyone's online who would like to make any questions or comments, then you can type those in and we can make time for those. In the meantime, if anyone who's here in the temple room has any comments, questions, or anything, Raghunath Prabhu.
Thank you very much for nice class, Prabhu. Yeah, it's just a little comment that this is what the ashram training is all about, is to learn for that concentration. And we have, it's quite a long period, 4 hours from 4:30 till 8:30. And, usually ashram devotees are asked, to make that commitment, to be there for those 4 hours. One is for their own benefit and learning that concentration. Sometimes, mind comes up, I need to be for the class or, for the japa period, etc. And of course, need to answer call of nature or whatever, or get refreshed or drink some water or something, you're feeling tired. But generally, the idea is to let's commit here, because when you're on your own, just like Bharat Maharaj, there's so many does or deers are there. When you're on, one deer is tapping your shoulder, another deer. What about the phone? What about this? What about third thing? When you're on your own, all those deers are distracting you. At least when you're with devotees, at least you physically kind of get opportunity to be there, less chance to get distracted by everything else. At least you're in a temple room, and you can keep bringing your mind back to hear the holy name, hear the transcendental celebration. So it's like it's a wonderful opportunity to actually practice it, and that's what is the ashram life is all about, to learn that concentration and being less distracted, being focused, and ultimately reaping that result of many years of practice. Then the mind eventually does start getting into the place, and sometimes you can experience that more often, and sometimes less often. But ultimately, goal of life is to remember Krishna, and whenever we manage to do that, we're coming closer to that goal.
Yeah, and that kind of brings to mind, just like you're saying, in one sense, for those who are in a situation, for those very rare souls actually, who are in a situation where they're actually sort of able to live in an environment which is so conducive to sort of practicing Krishna consciousness. In many ways, they have this as an advantage. So, for those who aren't in that situation, then we could create a whole seminar about that. Just how to practically apply these things if we're not living in that kind of environment. And I think it would actually be a very valuable thing to do such a thing. But one thing is that places like temples exist not only, in fact, I would say secondarily, they exist for the residents themselves. Primarily, they exist so that people can come and experience what it sort of means to practice Krishna consciousness in such a dynamic environment. So that then those people can then go back and have a better idea how to actually apply those things in their own situation. And it could be something as simple as if people are able to come and visit and even stay overnight and take part in the morning program, and then they have an idea what a morning program is, they could then, with advice, they could sort of get some sort of advice and feedback and see how can I adapt that to my own personal situation. And also, maybe even it may be an abridged version of a morning program. And then maybe once a week when we have a day off, we could say, okay, once a week I'll do a full morning program. 4 or 5 times a year, I'll go and stay at the temple and then have that experience. And the rest of the time, we just figure out how to do some kind of a bridge morning program. But the thing is that it keeps coming back to this point, when I chant, even if what we're able to do is quite minimal, still when we do that. So even if it's one round, for that one round, okay, I'm going to sit here and that's all I'm going to do is just chant and nothing else. If I'm going to read for 10 minutes a day, than just that. I'll just read and I'll put everything else aside for that time. There's a time and a place for everything. There's a time and a place for email. There's a time and a place for social media. There's a time and a place for Facebook. There's a time and a place for management. There's a time and a place for all these things. They're all, you could say, necessary parts of life now. It's like, you know, it's part of the way the world is. So it is part of our life, but there's a time and a place for it. And when it's time and a place for Krishna, and especially first thing in the morning, you know, I'm a big believer in this principle of having a good foundation. You know, whatever the foundation is, then whatever is built upon that foundation is based upon that foundation. So if the foundation of our day is good, solid, deep Krishna consciousness, even if it's 20 minutes of really good quality Krishna consciousness, then that foundation will affect the whole day. You know, the day will kind of stand upon this strong foundation, and that will, it sends like a ripple through the whole day. It's like Kadamba Kanana Maharaj said after one kirtan, before a kirtan, it's in Radhadesh Mellows, and he was saying that one of the qualities of the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra is that the sound and the effect of the mantra stays with us long after we've actually finished chanting it. So if we chant very nicely for 10 or 15 minutes, the actual vibration itself and the effect of that vibration will remain within the consciousness for a long time afterwards. So if we build our day upon this foundation of very attentive hearing of the Hare Krishna mantra, then that will then sort of send a vibration throughout the day, and it will affect in a positive way our work, our interactions, our relationships, our family life, our work life, our social life. It will have a positive effect on everything, you know. So it's something that everyone can take advantage of to a greater or lesser extent. Are there any? Is there anything online? Any comments or questions? Is anyone watching? Or? Okay. Hare Krishna. All right, so we should stop. We've gone over time. My apologies for going over time. I got distracted. Hare Krishna. and now, hopefully, after a fairly good foundation, we can go about our duties and hopefully be influenced by that foundation. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Gaur Ramananda.
His Grace Ramananda Prabhu ki